Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil on the show. I'm Matt Prehm. It's Monday after the Super Bowl, a day that should be a national holiday, right?
I'm on board, Matt. I think sign me up. Yeah.
I think it's something like 22 million Americans will not go to work today. We are at work. We are working. But nonetheless, we're going to break some news down that happened during Super Bowl weekend. That was Oregon receivers coach Junior Adams is leaving the program to take a job with the Dallas Cowboys at the NFL. That is per Matt Zenitz of 24/7 Sports and other reports as well across the sport landscape. First and foremost, Erik, I'm a little surprised. You knew Junior Adams. He talked about it before. I want to elevate myself. I want to get a higher job. Eventually, I want to be a head coach.
Right.
As a lot of these guys do. So you knew there would be an end time for him in Eugene. He would probably have to leave Eugene to be a head coach for sure. To be an offensive coordinator, maybe that happened at Oregon. More than likely, it was going to have to require him leaving. I just didn't think it would be for the NFL, which is a little twist that I wasn't quite expecting.
Yeah. No. First off, you're right. I think this is somebody who had higher aspirations or had aspirations of being, as you said, a head coach. And when you are dealing with people like that are, aiming for something greater, and obviously he was an incredible receivers coach, and I want to make sure we run through all that in a second. But this felt ultimately like where this was going to go eventually. But I'm with you, Matt, where this didn't seem like something I thought we would be reporting on today, certainly. And it didn't feel like there were really any tea leaves about this being something that was imminent either. So, I guess partly because, like you, Matt, I was kind of focused on the college landscape where there's not really, a whole lot of movement anymore. I know Ohio State just made a couple, assistant coach changes in the last couple of weeks, but in general, pretty much every staff is kind of close to being filled out. I know like I said, there's some cases where that's not true, but yeah, it wasn't totally on my radar. And now that we're here, though, Matt, I think first let's appreciate what he achieved here. And
he achieved a lot.
Because I was just thinking about where we were before he was brought on at that position. And Brian McClendon, remember, he was the interim head coach for the bowl game after Mario left, and everybody was really hoping he'd stick around. I think, as somebody who had done a really good job of recruiting, and I thought they'd had some good receiving seasons. And it was kind of a bummer when McClendon wasn't somebody that Dan was, or, maybe there were at least some people that felt that way. And Junior was somebody that came to Oregon with, I'd say, a very strong track record. You could point to the Cooper Kupp's development. You could point to some players at Washington. But I thought he probably recruited at the best he ever had at Oregon and developed some incredibly talented players here too. So when you think about it, this was somebody who was really able to do a good job and was very successful, very high end, as both a developer of talent. You think about, what Tez and Troy were able to do the last couple of years, statistically, two of the best seasons and probably two of the three best receiving seasons in school history back in 2023. And Tez is a shoulder injury in 24 from having another one of those kinds of seasons. And obviously we know Troy was a 4th round draft pick. I think Tez will be drafted in a similar range, maybe even earlier, possibly. So, you look at what he's been able to achieve there from a development perspective, and it's impressive. And then obviously the recruiting speaks for itself. So anything else you want to say on Junior and his time here before we kind of move on to what might be next for the Ducks?
Yeah, I just think the impact that this is going to have will have ripple effects. I don't think they're going to lose anybody. I don't anticipate that they lose any of their commits that they signed. But they did load up, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but like Corey and Moore was probably coming in part to be coached by Junior Adams.
Mm-hmm.
That will sting a little bit, I'm sure, for those kids. But I'll be curious to see, and this kind of maybe could be a segue into what's next for Oregon, is how this impacts 2026, how this impacts 2027. Mm-hmm. Because under Junior, Oregon, the perception of a receiver was changing. You talked on it a little bit. There wasn't a ton of talent, whether it was under Brian McClendon from under the Mario Cristobal days, or if it was the Willie Taggart year, or the Mark Helfrich years, or the Chip Kelly years. And before that, the school didn't produce a ton of receivers that made it to the NFL. And it felt like the talent level drastically got better under Junior Adams. The development got better. Think about what he did in 2 years with Troy Franklin in 2022 and then took him to 2023, where Troy Franklin had that historic season that was only beat because he didn't play in the bowl game, to be honest with you.
You mean Tez taking the receptions record?
Yeah.
Right.
And then Tez in 2023 and 2024, and the development he had. And I felt like other guys got better. Trayshawn Holden got better under Junior Adams. So, and this is a guy that's reputation was he is an elite recruiter, and he was also someone that was an elite developer. And that just wasn't at Oregon. It was at Washington. It was at Eastern Washington before that. I mean, recruiting Cooper Kupp. So this is going to be, and I think it's also to be noted, like this is one of the first guys Dan hired. So it's kind of one of his pillars of the staff. And Dan has said at multiple instances that one of his jobs is to get his assistants better jobs. And this is what's happened. You're now, Junior's now going to the NFL, the highest level of the sport. And I'll be honest, like I'm wondering, like, as college football and its landscape continues to change, we always hear about the stresses and the strains it puts on staffs and how you're always recruiting and the roster is always changing. He's going to the NFL where he doesn't have to deal with that. And he's coaching the best players. It's kind of a win-win situation there.
He might be coaching, the best receiver in football or one of the 4 or 5 in CD Lamb, depending. I mean, who you ask? Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams being other guys maybe in that short list of conversation of guys. I think it's possible Cooper Kupp reunites with him in Dallas. Possible. I'm not reporting anything. I'm just putting, I guess hypothesizing and throwing it at the wall that this guy is
he's on the trade block.
I was going to say, this is a guy who's not going to be in Los Angeles, we know. And, is his receivers coach landing in Dallas? Does that push anything there? And on the recruiting front, and maybe this kind of helps transition to the next part, but I've seen a lot of people ask, I've had friends reach out to me to ask if I think this impacts DeCorian more and what I think happens there. And obviously I'm not in DeCorian's head, but I do want to at least acknowledge, like, his primary recruiter is listed as Junior Adams, but it was really a co-primary recruitment because of Rashad Samples, right, whose name I think is going to come up a fair amount on this podcast.
Yeah.
Because Rashad's dad, and I think most people listening know this, was DeCorian's head coach at Duncanville High School. So there was a connection there. And this was something that was talked about when that was like one of the first questions that was asked to Rashad, I think, by James Crepia, like a year ago when he was brought in as the running backs coach, was everybody wanted to know about your connections to Duncanville. And guess what? That connection paid off majorly by landing one of the best recruits in school history. So I think there's a very good chance he's retained. I would probably be surprised if he did leave, but losing your position coach hurts. I think 2 other recruitments that I'm curious on, obviously the big one being Chris Henry Jr. in terms of where that puts Oregon. And this hire, I feel like, needs to be somebody that, I don't want to say has a connection with him, but at least somebody that
needs to move the needle.
Right. It needs to be somebody that he goes, okay, I would love to be developed by him. And then the other one, I guess I'm slightly curious on, is another 5-star, and that's Gatlin Bear, who we don't really talk about because he's kind of in this.
Still not here yet.
He's in this like weird, like liminal in between space. He's not in college. He's not in high school. He's out doing his mission. I don't think we talk about him, but we can remember back to when he flipped from Boise State to Oregon. It was in part because of a change in the Boise State staff. Part of me wonders, what is he thinking about losing the position coach that had recruited him? So I'd actually almost be, if I'm thinking about which commits or signees at receiver recently, I would be more worried about losing. I would put probably Gatlin Bear almost above DeCorian Moore, but we'll see what happens. Recruiting is always fluid, and maybe there's a pitch out there from like LSU or somebody who obviously was really close to, he'd committed to back before flipping himself. So, but that's kind of my 2 cents on that, because I know that's a question we get.
I don't think we're going to see any departures because of Junior Adams leaving. It's going to be felt in 2026, and with what you said, Chris Henry Jr. And Henry's kind of come out and already said, like, hey, I really like Oregon. They've done a really good job. They're making up a lot of ground, but kind of if Ohio State keeps Brian Hartline in his current role, which he's now been elevated to OC.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
I have a hard time seeing myself flip. Like, and so maybe it's a moot point anyways, because maybe he just sticks with his commitment because the guy he's committed to is still going to be there. But it's I agree with you. This is the one where you've got to make a hire that moves the needle to keep Chris Henry interested, so he just doesn't go, well, I was already committed here and I like Hartline. I'm just going to stick with it. I'm going to move on now because Junior's gone. And that's what I anticipate to happen. I think Oregon will make a good hire. I think they'll make something to bring someone in that resonates. And who that is, I think Dan Lanning's got options, right? Like you touched on him before, Rashad Samples. You can share it. He could be the easy move to receivers coach if Oregon wanted to.
Yeah, and that's not us reporting, unless, Matt, you've talked to somebody since we talked earlier this morning, and we kind of were going back and forth on some of this. But I could see a path, and I think others have brought this up as well, of just sliding Samples over to receivers coach. This is Oregon's running backs coach. He played the position in college, actually, and when he was brought on to Oregon to be the running backs coach last year after Carlos Loughlin left for Ohio State, he was previously Arizona State's receivers and passing game coordinator. And even if you go through like his whole CV, it's like assistant wide receivers coach, running backs coach, wide receivers coach, running backs coach. That's like kind of the way it's gone. So this is somebody who's already on staff. And to the point we made earlier, somebody that's very close with DeCorian, somebody who's very close with Evan Stewart, because it's another one of those Texas guys. This is an individual, at least, who it would already be pretty tight and close with these guys in terms of developing that relationship. And then from a recruiting perspective, going back to Chris Henry, somebody who's, I'm sure, already developed a relationship, that would be a recruitment continuity hire, not that you move him to that position solely for that purpose. So, and that would also potentially give you the option to elevate his title, give him a bit of a raise. Samples of somebody, Matt, how many NFL teams did we see, or college jobs do we see him tied to? A couple this offseason
Two or
himself.
three, it felt like. Yeah. Dallas being the most recent one.
Right. I was going to say that. So a guy that you already are probably going to be battling to keep over the next couple of years, this gives you an opportunity to turn, a disappointing outcome. And this is something I'd give Dan a lot of credit over the years of, okay, something doesn't necessarily go your way, or something that could be seen as a negative. I think about the Alabama job being kind of thrust out there, and people, oh, is he going to leave? And he turns that into the grass is damn green in Eugene. This could be a scenario you lose one coach, but you're able to solidify a relationship with another who's a pillar of the offensive staff. So that could be a path. Move him to receivers coach, go find a running backs coach.
Yeah, and that opens up the door. Maybe you've got a really good elite running back coach that that wants to come and could open the door for both hires to be made. And I think this isn't me reporting anything at all, but that could open the door for an Oregon running back who's been highly successful at the Group of 5 level and also the FCS level to come back to Eugene. He's got no ties to Dan Lanning, right, but it's a tie to Oregon. That's Andre Crenshaw. I don't know how many people remember him. He played under Chip Kelly, got to a couple, I think, BCS games. Has been highly successful at Western Kentucky. Before that, it was North Dakota State. And before that, he was coaching, I think, at a D2 level. But this is a popular name that's kind of risen through the ranks of the lower levels of college football. He's been highly successful. And that could open the door for you to bring him back home if you want to bring another running backs coach in. And again, like, just throwing out Oregon connection ties, and because this is a very early list, we've not heard any of these names officially being on board, but they're just ones that my mind instantly went to. Another name that's another former Oregon player that's had some success already, and was a guy that the last couple of years has coached one of the best Group of 5 receivers in college football. Colorado State's I'm trying to remember his name. He had that huge game against Colorado where he went for like 230 yards.
Former Oregon receiver. Sorry, I wish I was.
No, the current receiver played at Colorado State.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. He got hurt this last year.
Name. I'm gonna look it up really quickly, but James Finley is basically the guy that
is the coach you're talking about, right? Yeah, that's what I thought you were
Torrey
talking
Horton.
about. Yeah,
Torrey Horton is the guy, the receiver that I was talking about. He went for 1,100 yards and granted it's against Colorado, but 16 catches for 133 yards a couple years ago. This season he battled injuries and didn't have the year that he wanted. But James Finley is another guy that's kind of elevated himself through the group of five. He's a young rising coach at the position. Maybe they look to Drew Maringer, the tight ends coach, who's had history.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. That was another interesting one
of playing receiver, but I'm not on board with that one. I think he's kind of solidified himself as the tight end spot. Don't open that up. And then like Dante Ellington, he's currently on staff. We've seen in the past, Lanning elevate guys. I think most recently it was Wadood who went from analyst to GA and got like his own position group as like the corners or something to help there. Maybe Dante Ellington's an analyst. It'd be a big step up, but he has been with Junior for the last couple of seasons, has helped with Troy Franklin, has helped with Tez Johnson, is familiar with Evan Stewart. And then maybe a big one, a guy that's got some ties to Dan Lanning and would take a huge swing and connect on it to hit a home run is Cortez Hankerton from LSU, coached with Dan Lanning.
That would be a big one.
And also, it's an unbelievable hire, and it would be a shocking move. But that was just like the name that came to mind. Like, hey, Lanning and him have a connection. He coached at Georgia and then left Georgia to go to LSU, and LSU's always had elite receivers. But again, that would be a home run hire that it's almost too unlikely to even expect it to happen. But if you really want to swing for the fences, that would be one of them. So it's going to be interesting to see who they target and what position they target because of the versatility the staff has of samples and having the ability to coach multiple positions if they want to go that route, or if they want to keep them at running back and bring someone else in.
I mean, yeah, and then you throw in the possibility, and I agree that I think it's unlikely Drew Maringer becomes the receivers coach. And he's a name to at least note because I think he was the receivers coach at a couple of different schools prior to this. I know when he was at Texas, I believe he was a receivers coach. I'm just pulling up his CV as well. I had it up earlier. Texas, he was a receivers coach. Florida Atlantic, a receivers coach. Houston, he was a receivers coach. The only place he's been a tight ends coach is at Oregon. So could that be a move? And again, I'm probably with you, Matt, where I'm a little skeptical of that. But you think about it, if you could, in theory, go hire basically one of three different position groups on offense, right? I mean, you could go hire a running backs coach, a receivers coach, or a tight ends coach, depending on how you want to restructure the staff, which, again, it's not why you hire Rashad Sample or Drew Maringer or any of those guys. But when you have a coach who's got experience coaching a variety of positions, it does give you that option to kind of move guys around. But I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's obviously, worth noting that Dan's track record with assistant coach hires is pretty much hitting 1,000. I mean, I can't think of a hire that we've looked back at and gone, ooh, that was because I remember when Mario was here, and you might have to remind me on who the name was. There was a position coach he brought in for 1 year. And the guy bounced.
I was actually thinking about that earlier and was hoping you knew who he was.
Shoot. Yeah.
Let me look it up for a second.
Go for it. Because,
he was bad.
They missed on it so badly that it just kind of got pushed under the rug. I think this was like maybe between 18 and 19 seasons.
Yes.
And, anyway. So, but like we haven't had any of that with Dan. Like when guys leave, like Junior, they go off and take jobs in the NFL, or they go off and they take head coaching jobs or coordinating jobs.
Michael Johnson.
Michael Johnson's one. There was another one in there too, I thought. But there's been a couple under. Well, there was a couple of rough coaches.
Oh, Joe Von Bootnight.
There it is. That's exactly who it was.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of fans are going, I'm a diehard Duck fan. I don't even know who that is. And that's because he was so bad. He was so in and out that it was like, psh. But Dan hasn't had that. His track record's pretty clean. So we ran through a list of names that several of which maybe are going to be considered, some of which won't, I think. But regardless of where this winds up, and again, Matt, I don't necessarily think this has to be something that you figure out in the next week or two, but certainly before you start prepping for spring practice, you want this to be dealt with. But wherever it does end up, I think I speak for both of us and probably most Oregon fans as well, that you have a lot of confidence and probably supreme confidence that Dan's going to find the right guy.
I think maybe to wrap this up here, I think if I had to make like an off the cuff kind of prediction, it's going to be a guy that more than likely is going to come from a school that few people know about, but it's going to be, but when you start doing the research and it's like, wow, yeah, he produced this group of 5 NFL guy, then he went here and had a group of 5 NFL guy. And then he was an analyst here at a Power 5 school and was like the special assistant for receivers and coached these 2 guys in 3 years and whatever. And
right.
It's going to be a young guy that's going to have a success rate on the recruiting trail. He's going to have a solid development rate. I would be surprised if it's going to be this like wily veteran superstar receivers coach that's already established, like I threw out with Hankerton. Like maybe it is, and if it is, like heck yeah, awesome. But like Dan, I don't know what it is, but Lanning has this. He's talked about it. He's got this Rolodex that he has, and it's all these young dudes that are really good that he thinks just need an opportunity, and they're going to showcase how good they are. I'm banking that's where it's going to come from. It's going to come from his Rolodex of staff that he just keeps meticulous notes on over the last 5-6 years.
Well, and to your point, that's the track record. Like Will Stein, as awesome of a hire as that I think has proven to be, and I know there are some listening that disagree because of the Rose Bowl and whatnot, but big picture, like I think everybody can agree Will Stein hire's been pretty good. He wasn't on much of anybody's radar unless you were a diehard UTSA fan, right? Like I think Rashad Samples was somebody that had just come back from the NFL and was a receivers coach at Arizona State. And obviously there's a connection there with Dillingham that probably helps Dan kind of identify him as somebody. But, I just go through these hires and then you've got, of course, the guys that he's worked with a lot, like Brian Michalowski, who was also promoted from within. He'd been somebody he'd worked with at like basically every school Dan's been at, starting at like ASU way back when. And so, but like, yeah, no, you're right, Matt. Like that feels more where this hire is likely to go to. And maybe it will be one of these names that you threw out with Oregon connections. I also know, just obviously with recent history, there's not really been much of a desire to just bring somebody back just because they've got an Oregon connection. It has to be the right guy. And maybe one of those coaches has done enough to earn that distinction. But I would probably be a little surprised if that's where it goes either, just because I'm guessing he's got people on his list. He's maybe above them in terms of what they've done at other schools, but who knows? You could see this go a couple of different ways, obviously.
Yeah, I want to echo your comments of Oregon connections just automatically don't make him a candidate, and that's why I think it's going to be someone where we're going to look at all these connections to Oregon. We're going to look at connections of time spent with guys, and then all of a sudden it's going to come from somebody that you have to sit here and do a deep dive research of a week's time once he's been hired to find the connection, because it's going to be so hard to find.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back later this week with more coverage of the Oregon Ducks. We'll be tracking this now coaching hire for the next couple weeks as it plays out. We'll see what happens. I imagine it'll get done quickly. But until the next podcast, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.